Good morning and welcome to this Brass Tack Sunday, brought to you in association with Williams Industries Incorporated. I'm your host and moderator, Corey Lane, and we're talking the business of business post the downgrade. So given the latest downgrade by Standard & Poor's and given the destruction caused by recent passage of hurricanes throughout the Caribbean and further afield, how does the business sector in Barbados respond? How can we chart a path to recovery in these circumstances? Those are the questions that we would be looking at throughout today's Brass Tack Sunday from now until 1:15. Joining me in the studio, we have the Executive Director and member of ICAB, that is the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, Mr. Reginald Forley. Welcome back to the studios of Voice of Barbados.
Thank you very much. It feels like being at home again.
Home away from home. That is VOB for you. And of course, I don't even know which title to attribute to this next guest, but I will tell you we have Crystal in the studio, Crystal Howell. Good morning and welcome back to the studios of Voice of Barbados.
Thank you, Corey.
I think we are in for an interesting discussion. We are expected to be joined by one or two other guests. I can tell you we have Mr. Ryan Strawn. He is the economic spokesperson for the Barbados Labour Party, and we are expecting him to join us shortly. So, before we go into this discussion, let's take care of things in-house, and then we will get right into the discussion this morning. This is Brass Tack Sunday, brought to you in association with Williams Industries Incorporated.
You do not have to be a roofing expert to know that a metal sheet will rust where it is joined. That is one reason why the beautiful Permaclad U-panel and R-panel roof sheets sold at Williams Metals will outlast other roofing materials. Permaclad, colorclad and corrugated sheets are cut to the exact length that you will need, up to 40 feet and even longer. That means no joints from ridge to eave. Colorclad sheets come with a factory painted finish in white, blue, green, red, brown and yellow, and are fitted with screws for added resistance, tested to withstand high winds up to 130 miles an hour. Get a rail roof supplied at competitive prices. Delivered to you today from Williams Metals. Simply call Williams at Cane Garden St. Thomas, 425-2000, or Lowlands Christchurch, 428-1500.
Visit their website at www.williamsmetals.bb.
Okay, before we go any further, one of the things I want to do is to take a look at the idea of this thing called a downgrade, and also to look at what really is this idea of a sovereign credit rating. I think very telling and very interesting comments coming from senior lecturer in management and dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences in the Cave Hill campus, University of the West Indies, Dr. Justin Robinson. He has a piece out there. The text is really long. I would put it as mandatory reading, put it on our mandatory reading list. But there's some snippets I want to pull out for the listening public to understand and to put context to the discussion as we go forward this morning. And Robinson said, as part of the confusion around credit ratings is, and I quote, "we have made them into something they are not." So what are they? According to Justin Robinson and also, of course, Standard & Poor's website, it talks about the idea of a credit rating being that thing that the agency would use to determine government's probability of defaulting on debt and their ability to repay debt. So the credit rating would look at the finances, the positioning of government, and the way that the debt is structured, and determine whether the government is in a strong position to repay, in a fair position to repay, or in a weak position to repay. So obviously a AAA rating would say to creditors, to commercial bank, to investors that the government is in a strong position to repay. A CCC, like what Barbados has, would say to an investor, would say to a lender, there's a possibility that if, and I mean I could go to the court, if there are let's say a turbulence within the business sector, within this particular economy, financial or economic conditions, the government of Barbados may be unable to meet its obligations. I think the response from the government is, and that is why we would put context to the Prime Minister's comments, that we don't plan to go on an orgy of borrowing because a lot of the debt is local. And that is the message I believe that he was not only sending to Barbadians, but to persons overseas, in saying that we are not in a strong position to default on external debt because most of our debt is not external, it is internal. But let's pick that to pieces and let's look at business and how we chart a path. I just wanted to use that to put it in context in the discussion so that people will not see credit ratings as what Justin Robinson here is saying. It is not to pronounce on overall health and well-being of the economy or the nature of government's economic policies, but it speaks specifically to the idea of being able to repay. I kind of differ on the latter part because I believe that economic policies will speak to how you manage your debt and how you borrow. But enough of me, and on to the guests, the professions in this field. We start with you, Mr. Reginald Fardy. What are your opening comments amidst everything that I've just said?
Thank you, Corey, and good morning, listeners. I think you set the context there in trying to determine what is this credit rating thing and how important is it. The pushback has been over the past few years as we've had downgrade after downgrade, is that it's not, not a big deal. We're not going to borrow any money overseas and so on. Let me say that it is, and I agree that we should need to set the context as to what it is, but I take this as being one of several other indices which, when taken together, give a pretty balanced picture of the country's overall health. We could take the GDP growth rate, we take the credit rate, sovereign credit rating, we take the ease of doing business index, we take the competitiveness index of the World Economic Forum, we take the social one, the human development index. So amongst all of these, you can get a feeling of what's happening. I mean, we need not overweight any of them, but certainly it is a fact that over the last decade or so, we are nowhere near in the zone that we used to be in these various indicators. The only two that continue to stand in reasonable position are the GDP growth rates. I'm glad that we're back to like 2%, and the Human Development Index. We're a little lower, not as not as high as we used to be in terms of the ranking in the world, but we're not in a bad place. But we slipped terribly in terms of the ease of doing business. We've slipped terribly in terms of our competitiveness index. And why are these important? Narrowly speaking, each one has its specific purpose within its industry, and the general public and investors and others in business will use the credit rating, as you said, in relation to government's likely ability to repay its debt. What does a CCC mean? It means that the sovereign that is rated, in this case Barbados, is vulnerable and is therefore entirely dependent on external favorable conditions, a good economy, a good tourist season. So therefore, there's no resilience. There's no buffer. And in the higher ratings, where countries have a buffer. So if, for example, we were hit with a hurricane, we have less of a buffer than if we were an air-rated country. If we have a bad tourism season or one of our other means of earning falls, then there's less ability to ride out that storm, and hence the ability to repay is threatened on that score. But it's still more immediate than that, because at the end of the day, in terms of international lending, or not just international, but lending on a big scale, there are two components to an interest rate. People use the risk-free rate, which is typically the London interbank borrowing rate, LIBOR, and you add a risk premium. And very often, the risk premium is based on these sovereign ratings. So the lower, then you go from A to B into C, heaven help us not into D, then the higher the risk premium becomes. And in some of Barbados's existing loans, there is that kind of factor built in. So the grade and rating that we get translates into the actual cost of interest. But that to me is what it is. Those are the facts. However, what is more important to me is the ratings rationale. When you look at this entity, you could fault them on their methodology if you like, but they're not they're not a member of a first, second, or third party in Barbados, so they really have no interest in those matters that we consume ourselves about too much sometimes. And some members of the public say, they don't like us and they're jealous of how we live. They're not interested in that. They're out there doing their business. And the issues that they raise that are of concern to them are the issues that have been of concern to us in the Brass Tacks family. The high level of debt, the high level of the deficit, the low and continue to fall levels of foreign exchange, certainly from the business sector, and they've added in their ratings rationale, the poor track record with respect to implementation. So even their new policies are announced, there's that lingering doubt, will this one get implemented? And to me, those things coincide with the perspective of others looking on. So that, yes, do not overdo the rating thing, but at the end of the day, it is important when taken in its wider context as an indication of how much confidence an investor would tend to have. And I'll close on this in terms of my opening comments. At the end of the day, whether we like it or not, an investor, whether it be a Barbadian investor or an overseas investor, who's looking to establish a business, who's looking to put some money into a financial instrument, will look at these indicators. And they would get their half-sheet report, which will say which are the countries that they should look more carefully at. Barbados used to get on the half-page or quarter-page report as one of the options, and then you meet Dennis Johnson and Corey Lane, so these people are good people, they see how we live, we can dance to time and whatever. I like the feel for the place, and you get the investment. If you don't get on the quarter sheet as a finalist or a semi-finalist, then you don't even get a chance to show the thing that you can do. So confidence really is, investor confidence is influenced by these indicators, and like I said, I'm not narrowly speaking of the credit rating only, but the GDP levels, the ease of doing business, the World Economic Forum competitiveness report, and I hope today we'll discuss all of these, because we have to make the decision as a country that we're not in the position in any of these indicators that we should be, and look at what strategies we need to do to get us back there. We were there before, and it sends a wrong signal to investors that you are worsening in your indices rather than improving.
Okay. Before we go over to Crystal, let me welcome into the studio Mr. Ryan Strawn. Good morning and welcome to you, sir.
Good morning, Corey. Good morning, listeners. Good morning.
With the arrival of Mr. Ryan Strawn, it must be said, and it is a policy of Voice of Barbados to make sure that we put this out there each and every time. If we have to, we would have made an invitation, would have gone to the Democratic Labour Party, the administration, and I do not believe that they will be sending anyone. My producer informs me that they will not be sending anyone. And I think we have to do that for balance and fairness, to let you, the listeners, before you start and ask where are the members of the Democratic Labour Party or the administration, we have to put that out there. With that said, I also want to take this opportunity to say a happy birthday to the Minister of Finance and the Leader of the Opposition. I did ask the Minister of Finance, and he said today is his birthday and he does not have permission from his wife to be here. So, tongue in cheek, happy birthday to both of them. With that said, let's go over to Crystal for your opening comments, and then we go on to you, Ryan, and then we get down to Brass Tacks. Crystal, your opening comments.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm going to be wearing my Institute of Internal Auditors hat as I'm on their board. I'm also a member of ICAB, so I hope that I can represent well for both parties. I would like to respond to the comment made that it doesn't matter because we don't plan to borrow anymore, and that is simply not true, because we've had economists, I've had, and especially Shane Lowe on my show, we have discussed that at length, where we spoke about the fact that you may not be borrowing any new debt, but you have currently existing debt that has to be refinanced, and the interest rates that we're going to have to refinance at is going to be very difficult for us to be able to sustain that level of interest payments if we are forced to reborrow at that current rate. And we just simply do not have the funds to say, well, we will give back the money. So we're in a very difficult position because we can't give back the money and we can't afford to refinance at that rate. And the first one, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, is due in 2021. So for anybody who's counting, this is 2017, that is very soon. And there are no miracle fixes between now and then. that would put us in a position, because at the current amount that we have, it is double the amount that we have in foreign reserves. So we are in a very tight position, because even if we had to give up every single penny we have in foreign reserves, we still have only covered half, and we can't feed ourselves. So that's just putting it in very simple terms, because sometimes I think people try to use or speak in a manner that might not exactly sinking for persons. So I'm just trying to put it right out there. That is the position that we're in. The other factor I'd like to address is persons thinking that it doesn't affect us. It does. We've had, and I've seen for myself, notifications from companies overseas advising persons not to invest in Barbados anymore. And I've seen the letterheads, they're legitimate. These are coming to persons who have shares in these companies and who would invest with them. And they're receiving these notifications that Barbados is no longer, if you do invest, you're doing it at your own risk, and they're advising against it. So that hurts our chances of being able to find persons of repute who will come and invest in Barbados. And this is a harsh reality that we have to face. Whether we agree with Standard & Poor's assessment or any other rating agencies, the impact still affects us. So we can sit here and argue about that from now till cows come home. We still have to live with the consequences of being downgraded, of ranking at 128 out of 130 countries. That's still our reality to live with. And we have to listen to the persons who are giving advice and try to figure out why there's so much difficulty in terms of implementing advice, because I hear it not just on Brass Tacks, on almost every channel you can think of. Persons are giving great advice, but nothing is being implemented. And I think if we start looking at that, we might be able to get to a point where we actually see progress happening in our country to get us back to where we have to go, and understand that at this point there are no quick or easy fixes, but we have to make sure that we rally together so that we do not become a country that used to be great.
I think some would argue we are there already. And that is why I tell my leaders, my ministerial friends, etc. Notice I say "and" because people believe that only people in politics or politicians are the leaders of this country, but the leadership of the country spans beyond that. When it comes to decision, yes, it is the executive, which is cabinet, but outside of that, we each have our role to play, whether it be media leaders or whatever. I think it's a great point that you made there, Crystal, in relation to this whole idea of solutions, because they often say, we come here on Brass Tacks and other talk shows and we just criticize. Bring the solutions, bring the recommendations. And I tell them, you are not listening. Because if you read the dailies, if you listen to the call-in programs, people out there are giving solutions, to use a Bayesian term, grammar. Yeah. You understand? Are they being tried? Are they being implemented? I think everyone in Barbados, all 280,000 of us, have to raise our hands and say no. So far, we've picked up the impact and the effect of this credit rating, and the latest credit rating, along with all the others, is that it makes investors ask the question to lend or not to lend. Mm-hmm. And if yes, high rates. Mm-hmm. It is a push factor for investors, because investors, as you say, Crystal, are being told, look, be careful with Barbados. Yep. On the WhatsApp, someone says, good morning, sir. As far as we were informed, credit once acquired, local or international, it is classified as credit by the Credit Bureau. So don't let the political figures fool you. One of the other impacts here by the email, it says, please take a read of the enclosed, and I'll take a look at that during one of the breaks. The critical difference of a CCC rating is that commercial banks are not allowed by law to invest in a country bearing this rating. Do you have any idea what this now means in terms of sourcing finance, even for private sector ventures now? And this is something I can't verify from here, but during the break, I will try to, or I'll get my producer to try to verify that. Because if that is true, that is one of the things affecting the way we do business post this last downgrade CCC. Mr. Ryan Strong, you've heard the opening comments. Step up to the wicket. Let me see how you get back, sir.
Good morning again, everybody.
Good morning.
Now, as I was coming in, I was listening to your preamble. And so I just want to touch a little bit on that before I move into the real issue, as I see it. You were mentioning Dr. Robinson's article in today's paper. was particularly disappointing, and I think certainly with your last comment, Dr. Robinson is the chairman of the National Insurance Board. And just to make it absolutely clear, our investment strategy, as far as the national insurance is concerned, we would not allow our national insurance to invest in any body sovereign fund that is not investment grade. That's first and foremost. That is in the investment policy guidelines. So if you want to buy a bond outside of Barbados and the national insurance, we're going to make an investment in such a bond, its policy directive is that you cannot invest in anything that is not investment grade with the use of our national insurance funds. So when I read his article this morning, it was disappointing to me as a chairman to see that kind of narrative, because this isn't, national insurance is not just some abstract thing, yeah? It is there to secure the livelihoods of a lot of Barbadians who have worked hard to make sure they can set aside something for the future. But I don't want to let that be the necessarily essence, but I'm just saying, if the chairman of the national insurance is having these questions about the notion of a downgrade, then I'm concerned, because it means that the people that ought to be charting
the decision makers
our future, that there's something not quite right there. That's not a personal attack on him. Just saying that's the guidelines of the national insurance. We all subscribe to it, and so therefore the fact that we are at Triple C, and a lot of things have been happening with the national insurance, which have been questionable. Let me put it that way. I'm not here to scare anybody. I'm just letting you know that these are things that we all have to grapple with, one way or the other. And so that's disappointing to me on that score. But
can I put a counter to that to you before you get more into your opening? In my conversation with the Ministry of Finance, I put that same type of thinking to them, and their response was that if you don't invest in yourself, who should invest in you? But more importantly, a lot of people praise this whole idea of the Singapore model, when Singapore has about 90% of its investment in certain aspects of their economy coming from inside the same national insurance type scheme thing. And if we're going to praise Singapore for it, why are we criticizing ourselves for it? That was their response. What is your response to that?
There's a difference between investment and a slush fund. And that's all I will say on that. Okay?
I love it. I love it. I would offer my own counter to myself, and looking at the research as late as 2016, Singapore had about US $1.766 trillion in debt. But the difference there also is that it also has significant domestic deposits to be able to do so, whereas Barbados, we don't have that luxury. So go ahead, sir.
Right. So let us get to the essence in terms of the impact, because I don't want to talk about the rating of it as if it's just something out there. This is something that people actually live every day. So let me just go back 10 years, okay? When you filed your income tax in April 10 years ago, yeah? By the end of June, July, you were getting those income taxes back in terms of your refund, okay? Your garbage used to be collected on a weekly basis. If the truck brought down, it will come the next day or whatever. Okay. You had, certainly if you were below the threshold for filing income taxes, there was a credit available to every single Barbadian who fell into that category to be able to reclaim in terms of the reverse tax credit. So these are things that happen in an environment where the policy of government was consistent with allowing that to happen. Now, all of that happened with relative certainty, and people experienced this. Standard & Poor's at that time assessed what was happening in Barbados with respect to its debt, its deficit, and all of these things that people's interaction with government, its experience with government happened. And at that time, it was double A. The reserves were high. The deficit was relatively low in comparison to but certainly in terms of what's happening now. The debt service was never an issue because money was circulating in the economy. And so long as money is circulating in the economy, meant that young people, when they left school, will get a little job. And as soon as you get that job, household incomes rise. And so therefore, when Standard & Poor's looked at the economy 10 years ago, It was double A. So if anybody that's questioning their competence or anything, you can, as I said, you can disagree on methodology or anything. But the reality is that today, if you file your income tax in April, as you're required to do every year, you are not going to get that income tax in the same year in which you file it. That has been our experience. And so therefore, the downgrade of itself is not just of the credit quality of Barbados. These are the things that people are actually experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So if you go through the myriad, and I'm not suggesting at all that 10 years ago, Barbados was perfect. But if you assess what happened in Barbados 10 years ago compared to today, you go through systematically what has been your experience personally. There are not many people in Barbados who can say that compared to 10 years ago, when Standard & Poor's would have assessed, okay, things may not be perfect, it's double A.
Let me ask you this. What do you say to the obvious question that the other side will bring to you, that the economy internationally 10 years ago is different to the economy today? What do you say to those
Or
persons?
127 other countries able to do better in this same
You
economy than
cheating.
us.
No, the other side, and the truth is...
But you know, you
the
hear it, and
there
I
is-
can hear them on the outside almost so loudly coming through the studio.
Correct,
that
correct.
is the question.
Correct.
Why don't ask Mr. Strong that?
There's no other side. Let me tell you why there's no other side. We are part of this thing called CARICOM. Yeah? And we are all facing the same conditions.
Thank you.
We are in the same market, trying to do the same things. What is so special about Barbados that we have been downgraded so many times when everybody else has been faced the same circumstances?
Some worse.
Worse, because certainly some have had natural
Less
disasters to
resources.
deal with. And they've done what was required to move forward. Now, that ought not to be a political discussion.
I would prefer it not to be.
It should not be. We have had 10 years of total mismanagement, and that has contributed to the downgrade, so to speak. But I'm saying that every single Barbadian has felt in their own lives a personal downgrade, because this Barbados in which we have lived over the last 10 years is not the same Barbados as it was before. Now, the international economy has gone through some challenges, of course, but the world is always uncertain. It has always been uncertain. And at no point in our history has there been any certainty with respect to anything that we've pursued in Barbados. And the reality is that we have to look at our neighbors. What is it that they have done that somehow we seem to have forgotten what we used to do? And so therefore, when they were looking at us and learning from us, there is no, I don't want to get into a Barbados versus CARICOM thing, but the reality is this: people in the region used to look to Barbados for leadership to get out of a situation. And
At all levels.
And we now have lost a sense of self-belief because we have been allowed to believe that nothing better can be done. And I'm saying to all Barbadians that that's not true. It is simply not true. Now, this issue of the CCC, and it's not, we are in this position now. There is a way out of this position. But the way out of this position is not to put your head in the sand and say, I ain't gonna do this, I ain't gonna do that, I ain't gonna do the next, I ain't gonna do the third. If something is wrong, you have to fix it. And in fixing it, you have to be able to have we must now be in a position, we should be in a position where our government should be coming to say, look, this is what is the case. I don't like what the choices are, but in order to get out of this situation, we have to. And the reality is that we must be mature enough as citizens. Not that I'm a Barbados Labour Party candidate. I'm a professional economist. There are lots of other economists around this country.
And you are a
across,
Barbadian.
and I'm a but more than that, I am particularly frustrated that every time we have this discussion every 6 months, and yet right now, as we speak, there's nobody here from the government to articulate to the people of Barbados.
Let me send a quick note to them, because when this happened, I see it as a strategy almost. It puts the moderator in the position where we seek to bring balance to have to put their position for them. And I'm not here to do that. I'm here to moderate the discussion. So they better get their people on the line. So I can let you all know the number is 4341790. And of course, you can send your WhatsApp also if you want to hide your voice. In some cases, 266-IVOB, that is 266-4862.
This is not time for hiding.
No, it's not time for hiding. It's time for serious discussion, because by 1:15, I want to look more at the fix, but we've spent some time, and I guess we could spend a little bit more time looking at what the present situation is. Because amidst everything that we've spoken about this morning, I want to look at how do we chart the path forward. Now, if we cannot get the government to realize or to budge according to you guys, what can the private sector, what can business do to help chart this path forward? Reginald wanted to make a point for some time. We're going to take a comment from you, and then we go over to the telephone lines.
I just want to make two quick comments, part of further introductory comments. Well, first of all, in terms of business impact, the number of businesses around the world, pension funds and mutual funds, for example, are not permitted to put their investors' money at undue risk. So that I've had the opportunity many years ago of doing roadshows in the United States, selling Barbados bonds, and we were out in the market, and we would always get the bonds sold in DC because they met that criteria. Nowadays, you cannot get a teacher's pension fund in Oklahoma to buy a Barbados bond because we put in teachers' money at risk. Those are just some of the guidelines we have. Similarly, here in Barbados, a mutual fund with your money and mine cannot go into certain risky investments. So that the opportunity for Barbadians to put financial instruments out there get severely constrained in terms of who can buy them. Not the people who will buy them, but bear this in mind, when you get into the speculative or junk range, the investors who will line up to take it, but they charge you phenomenal rates of interest. These are people who are willing to put their money at risk for an appropriate reward. They're like loan sharks. You remember Michael Milken of the 1980s? They're guys who are junk bond kings. They make a lot of money on that. The other point I want to make very quickly is that a sovereign's rating has an impact on the rating of private businesses. And a rule of thumb is often used that a business cannot have a rating higher than 2 points above its sovereign. You remember a company called Sagicor, previously the Mutual, as old as the hills of the Scotland district, a Barbadian company. Do you know it's now a Bermudan company? Because in order to protect its investors' money, protect its reputation, Sagicor is traded on the London market and all sorts of things. It had to re-domicile. Now, they haven't taken the buildings anywhere, but the corporate entity is a Bermudan entity because it's a worldwide company, and it had to do that because its own credit rating, and an insurance company, credit rating is important, was tied to the Barbados rating. And we have that situation in some of the international business sector, so there are practical issues with respect to that. So I just wanted to throw that in there as part of the immediate rating. Businesses don't often come to speak about it. The final point I want to make on that score, in terms of immediate impact, there are businesses that have been operating in Barbados 100 years, 50 years, 20 years. They have built relationships with their suppliers, with their creditors overseas. They can send an email, a fax, a phone call. John, send me down 2 containers of whatever. And he said, no problem, they're on the docks even as we speak. And they will pay it 30 days later, 45 days later, whatever. There are businesses that are losing their credit facilities overseas. And you know how difficult it is time-wise and practically-wise to prepay for goods to be shipped to Barbados. So the impact is not theoretical, it's not about economics, it's not about politics or scoring points. These are practical things that impact on everyday Barbadians trained to do business and to go about their ordinary work in industries. And remember this, an economy is an aggregation of industries, and an industry is an aggregation of individual businesses. Anytime you have an economy that is in trouble, you need to come off that micro level sometimes and come down to the micro. What's happening in the individual businesses? And this is where Kristen and I, as accountants, not blowing our whistle, but they're in every business. We have a perspective which is really where the rubber hits the road. And I think that sometimes that perspective isn't heard as often because it gives real color. It really shows how these high-level policies impact on the ground.
But let me ask you this as a very serious question. We can come to the callers a little later. What are you seeing when you look at these businesses now with the downgrades, and even before the downgrades, with the last set of downgrades? What are we seeing on the road?
The cost of doing business has increased naturally, as I mentioned, the whole interest of the credit, the ability to secure credit overseas, the kind of concessional rates which you might have been given by companies overseas, or the willingness of companies to give you extended time to pay is obviously reduced. Because here is it. You're sitting overseas somewhere, China, United States, wherever we get stuff from. And you're looking at these numbers that says Barbados is now a triple C, like Venezuela. And there's only about 2 other countries I came across which are either double or triple C. Remember, double C is worse than triple C. But there are not many countries in this zone that we're in now. And that sends a red flag. Do you really want to, with a country with declining foreign reserves, the reserves have declined each year over the last 4 or 5 years, do you say, well, don't worry about Barbados, we'll get that payment eventually? Or does your credit department say, well, look, we really need to ensure we get money up front or have a very limited time period? So the whole matter of the ease and confidence with which our businesses have been able in the past to place orders for equipment, for supplies, for inventory, that has been severely constrained, and they're having increasing difficulty. And of course, on the reverse side, with the economic downturn and the policies which have been put in place to constrain the demand for foreign exchange, that has shrunk economic activity in Barbados. So making a projection about what your Christmas sales will be for 2017, for me, prudence would dictate that I would estimate they will be lower than they were in 2016 because there's less disposable income available. So I have the prospect of a less bright Christmas coming up as far as sales go. I also have then to manage that with not overly extending myself as far as financing for inventory. So it really makes managing businesses in this kind of environment a bit more challenging. Not impossible, but just a bit more challenging.
Let me say this, and I put this to the panel too as well. So we have all of these negatives coming out of what this credit rating is supposed to mean. Yet we have the acting Prime Minister, Mr. Richard Seeley, at the last lunchtime lecture saying we are in the right direction. We've had robust tourism growth. We are projected to have 2% growth in the economy coming up. So don't mind this thing. We are on the right direction. How do you come to that? Let me start with you, Reg, and I don't want to unfair you, but you were in politics. You were in this situation. What would you say if you were in a situation like this?
Well, the measure of economic growth is really 2 things.
Restaurant pulls out a big fat folder. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this radio show. Two big fat folders. So start by.
In a sense, if you've been having economic declines or very flat growth, it is almost a bit easier to show some positive growth because there's not much where you can go beyond that. But the measure of GDP, as Randy, economists will tell you, is only one measure, and it's not a comprehensive measure of all that's happening. So we're very happy to have the growth. But in our countries, we need to look at our vulnerability. We need to look at sustainability. And if you were to use the vulnerability index rather than GDP as a measure, our vulnerability index has shot up through the roof. And confidence, economic confidence of investors really turns on their projection of what is likely to happen in the medium and long term. You do not invest money in a building, for a factory, for a store, even for a home, based on just your projection or your expectation of what will happen next year. This is based on what will happen 5-10 years from now. The more volatile your business or your economic environment becomes, it becomes more difficult to make the commitment to that longer term investment. Now, fortunately, not every investor is subject to all of the vagaries. If you have a special incentive regime where government has guaranteed that you will have a no income, no taxes, or whatever might be the framework is guaranteed. In the case, let's say, of Sandals, nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing them, but I'm just saying that if I have a special regime in international business and tourism, I am kind of insulated somewhat from some of the vagaries of Joe Blow, auto mechanics down the road, who will discover that the NSIR will change and has to pay that, income tax rates will change. So you, in a sense, you can get
we got to take a break. Before we take the break, I want you to answer the direct question. Mm-hmm. How would you speak to the public in the face of the last downgrade? What kind of language would you use? What would you say?
Oh, direct conversation. Mm-hmm. If you have a problem, you face it and you fix it. I wanted to make a point about Jamaica, but I have to mention
Yeah,
after the
maybe
break.
come back.
But Jamaica has been able to start showing recovery by direct conversations with the people. Face it and fix it.
But I'm here learning a lot, and people talk about brass, about complaining, but it's very educational because in terms of these credit facilities and the lack of extended pay for business and so on, this is not a national discussion. I've not been hearing about this. Should I blame ICAP? Should I blame Starcom? I don't know which one to blame, but I know that I can give credit to Williams Industries Incorporated for this brass tax Sunday. We'll be right back.
For building supplies, big or small, and Williams Metals, we have it all.
Now is the time for you to fence your property with galvanized green, white, or brown chain link fencing and our brown band galvanized pole pipes, which are the longest lasting. We will give you a free estimate too on all your fencing materials.
For building supplies, big or small, and Williams Metals, we have it all. And Williams Metals, we have it all.
Visit their website at www.williamsmetals.bb.